I think we're seeing a shift from very technical content, which it's still out there and still important. There's still a target for that, to a more use case and application focused marketing kind of approach. It's getting more niche, it's getting more targeted. The content itself is speaking more towards the end user.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Zooming In on IoT. Now, the tectonic plates of IoT and digital transformation are moving big time these days. But 75% of all IT projects tends to fail. Too much magic get lost in these one-to-one Zoom meetings we're all in. So how about we open up these meetings, bring together thought leaders, and share knowledge and opinions so we can better those 75% together. Now, this format will be lo-fi, high value. Let's go. As always, my name is Anders, and I'm the CCO at Onomondo. We do cloud connectivity tailored to IoT. We are currently 25 people located in Copenhagen, operating in more than 140 countries on behalf of our customers. And enough about us. Today's guest, I'm really proud of hosting, actually. This is an industry peer like few others within IoT. You will probably know of the podcast called IoT For All and the IoT Media Network. We have none other than Ryan Chacon with us today. Ryan, great to have you here. Could you please introduce yourself for those who might know you or might not do yet?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me on. My name is Ryan Chacon. So I'm one of the co-creators of IoT For All. I'm also our podcast host. I've had my background has basically been in IoT startups and technology startups ever since I graduated from college. So kind of been in the space for a number of years, have a background in marketing and the business side of things. So kind of have steered most of my engagements towards that side. Not the most technical, but learn a lot every day being involved in IoT For All and just kind of being, in the space, talking to experts like yourself on a daily basis.
And Ryan, you're helping myself and so many others out there actually learn about IoT. So on behalf of everybody, thanks a lot for what you guys are doing. Would you mind talking a bit more into what it is and present IoT For All?
Yeah, absolutely. So IoT For All has an interesting story. We started it back in 2016, and the idea back then was to create a publication or create content, even at that fundamental level, around what IoT is and the value it can provide for businesses and organizations, speaking to a more non-technical audience. At the time, we saw most content out there was very dense, very engineer to engineer focused. And one of our kind of thoughts about the growth of the space was that if we were going to reach these high projections that a lot of these analysts had for us, we were going to need to be able to have adoption increase. And one way to do that was going to be able to have a lot of these adopters, a lot of these companies that don't work in IoT, better understand what IoT is. And a lot of those individuals making those decisions were not technical. So we started out writing very simple explanation content, and we actually called it that. We called them simple explanations. We gained a very large following rather quickly, and then moved it to its own.com and built a full-scale media publication. The publication covers everything from IoT to AI to ML, mainly right now focused on enterprise. And we work with organizations across the entire industry to help publish, help produce, help distribute their content, their knowledge, their expertise to the world, to hopefully create an environment in which people can learn about IoT, learn about AI, digital transformation, and make it more accessible to people. And one of our real goals is to kind of sit between the buyers and sellers to provide that expert guidance and support by aggregating and creating the best possible content and resources for our audience possible to help them stay informed, make better decisions, and at the end of the day, hope it increases the adoption, which then is a win for everybody.
Absolutely. What a tight pitch and a strong mission, Ryan. I'm curious, just personally, how's it been sitting sort of behind the steering wheel of that rocket propelled journey from starting out of nowhere in 2016 to now being such an industry peer, not only in the US but globally?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, to be completely honest. I mean, the industry has gone through a ton of transformation over the last number of years. It's grown up really quickly. We had this pandemic happen, which influenced things in certain ways, kind of drove use cases down a different path than maybe a lot of companies were anticipating. But from our side, it's been very exciting. The team, we're a small team, but we've grown over the last couple of years. It's been really exciting to meet individuals and the experts from around the industry, learn what people are doing, kind of get these insights shared, make them accessible to more people, and just start to kind of debunk the theory that IoT is really hard and confusing and is something that organizations don't need, because we're seeing now more than ever how important IoT is and how important IoT can be for organizations kind of no matter what industry you're in. And it's been really cool to be part of that journey and help contribute to that overall goal and mission that, like we think is contributing and helping everybody out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then today is sort of the other way around. Normally, you're great at putting people on the spot, asking the good guiding questions and enlightening all of us. And today, I get the pleasure of doing the same to you.
Absolutely.
So I mean, let's start off with the basic question: what is IoT today, seen from where you're sitting?
Yeah, so IoT is like I mentioned a second ago, it's definitely getting more mature than it was, 5 years ago or so. I think it's becoming synonymous with and probably one of the key elements of digital transformation. It really
Absolutely.
is that that next step in bringing things more connected, making people, companies, and physical objects more efficient and effective. Things that we were kind of doing before with M2M, but as it's kind of changed over to IoT and spread out across different industries, new technologies around, connectivity, different hardware has been built, things like that. Just these capabilities have enabled so much more. And so for us, making these new insights into how things work, how things are performing, by things I mean like physical objects, it's allowing companies to make better decisions. And you can basically list all the benefits kind of on an ongoing list for a while. But I think that's a pretty good kind of summary of kind of where we think things are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your point of view on how closely IoT and digital transformation is actually connected. I believe it was a strong peer from IBM, Harjo, we had on a few episodes ago that really said, if you want to change anything today, normally, you will have tech as part of that equation. You will need data,
Sure.
and data comes from capturing it,
Yep.
and that's the device, the hardware part of IoT. Then you get into the connectivity, you get into cloud commuting, and there's your output. That's what you can start changing things with, right?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of think about just what IoT has enabled us to do, and kind of it's crazy how we haven't been able to do that at this scale for a long time. I understand a lot of the technologies have enabled this that we haven't had until recently, but if you just think about us as humans and how we process and make decisions, we're constantly receiving and interpreting data in our own minds in every decision that we make, and businesses were doing that too. But we have all these physical objects that businesses use to operate and to provide and build their products and solutions to the world, and we haven't always been able to pull information and direct data from them, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. But because of the technologies we have recently that have kind of been launched and are enabling more opportunities for these use cases to come to market, I think it's just such a great time for us to be able to do this now, and it's really exciting stuff at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And so, taking into consideration, you and I will not have this in-depth tech discussion on IoT
Right.
today, Ryan.
Sure.
So let's take the other perspective. What's your point of view on how IoT is being marketed these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. So like I mentioned when I was kind of giving the intro, most content and the ways companies were kind of pushing themselves out there is they were leading more with the technology first. And I think what we've learned is that, with all due respect to the amazing nature of the technology, people don't really care about it as much as they care about the end solution doing what they need to do for their business. Now, obviously, there's always a kind of a split between the types of buyers out there that are understanding and kind of making the decisions to purchase IoT. There are those that are putting a solution together to then sell, which, yes, they'll care way more about the technology than the other group, which are the ones who are looking for the solution to be built to help their business for themselves or their customers. So I think we're seeing a shift from very technical content, which it's still out there and still important. There's still a target for that, to a more use case and application focused marketing kind of approach. It's getting more niche, it's getting more targeted. The content itself is speaking more towards the end user and the potential buyer, as opposed to taking a very broad strokes approach and trying to, be the thing that can do everything, if that makes sense. So being able to talk to the intended customer, the intended end user, or like a one-off connection from those individuals, I think is something we're seeing a lot more of. And organizations just in general are looking for ways to stand out and separate themselves from the pack, because there are a lot of companies who do similar things in the space. So competing for customers is very difficult. So, a lot of these organizations are working with companies to help them get their content, help them get their messaging out. And I think all of that is contributing to this shift to speaking to a slightly different audience now, as opposed to when we were starting and it was very technical, more engineer to engineer focused.
Yeah, interesting point. I'm thinking here, like we've talked about in actually a different context, because we'll appear on your show as well
Sure.
within not too long.
Right.
We had a chat about this notion of I wasn't in IoT until a year ago. I was in another part of tech, consumer electronics, and you have these huge companies that actually really push via amazingly big marketing budgets towards setting an agenda, creating needs that might actually have some value on the other end for the end consumer, or that's basically about pushing some products. Where sure. I would echo, I see some of the, there's definitely also a thing in IoT, but I do see a change here. I think you guys at IoT For All is certainly representing, cutting through some of the, let's call it BS out there. Everybody's saying the same and battling on budgets, but
sure.
How are these sort of more niche comms how do you see them from your side?
So what do you mean exactly?
I mean, like the more niche focused content, the more transparent approach, the more objective approach than just the big marketing budget driven agendas.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's allowing people to cut through the noise and really stand out. And I think that's something that organizations haven't been able to do, especially smaller ones. And if you look at the landscape of IoT as a whole, there are so many small IoT companies that specialize in certain areas, specialize in, with certain verticals and things like that. I think it was IoT Analytics just put out a report with like 1,200 IoT startups. And I was looking through that list the other day, and it just amazes me of all these organizations that, you just didn't know existed. And I think the ability to be able to cut through the noise and to take that more niche focused approach allows them to kind of fall better into those lanes where people are searching for that kind of thing. So let's say, for instance, you're a small IoT startup focused and you build a solution that is focused on a single use case for a particular industry. If you can kind of own that area through the content you're creating and the marketing you're doing, you have a chance to stand out more than these large organizations that are taking a much wider approach by, saying, oh, we have a solution development platform, or we have a, hardware that can do everything for every industry. That's not what people are necessarily searching for. The buyers are searching for. They're searching for specific things to solve specific problems for their specific business in their specific industry, right? So if you can capitalize on good SEO and capitalize on good content, sharing that knowledge and that expertise that you have, there's a very good chance that if you do it correctly, you can get in front of the buyers without having to be a big organization with tons of money. And I think that's something very important and something that we're seeing success with every day on IoT For All, which is, I think, contribute a lot to the engagement we're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's make that a segue to the next question. I'm
sure.
eager to ask you here. Where do you see IoT is heading?
So it's very interesting to think about where it was in 2016, which is kind of when I got involved in IoT, where it is now and where it is going to be in, let's say, 5 years from now. I think the one thing that I've definitely seen is demand is increasing, and at the same time, cost is going down, especially for a lot of the components that are going into IoT, which is honestly one of the bigger reasons companies haven't always been eager to adopt IoT. I think there's two things. One is cost, and then the other is they're probably more than this, obviously, but one is cost and the other is the educational element, is understanding all the different components that are going into IoT. But because we're seeing education increase, we're seeing cost decrease, so that overall we're just going to see demand increase, which is a key to adoption, right? So that reluctancy to adopt, we think, is going to go down. On the technology side, I think one of the big areas we hear a lot about and we focus a lot about is the connectivity piece, which is vital to these solutions working, because in order to get the data off the object, you need connectivity to make it accessible. But so we think connectivity options are going to grow, and this is again a key to adoption. A lot of people are overwhelmed by connectivity options. They think there's too many. I don't know what to choose. But in all honesty, if you work with a company that knows the different options out there, it's actually better because you have more options to find the perfect fit for connectivity, which does influence your price on a pretty high scale. So new connectivity options like low Earth orbit satellites are becoming very popular, which is very exciting stuff to follow to. 5G, obviously. Now we think 5G may be kind of overkill for a lot of solutions that a lot of customers will need, but the fact that 5G is there provides a whole nother case for different use cases, which are very exciting. NFC, private networks, things like that. So connectivity options growing is a big area that we see that's important now and will continue into the future. I guess one is interesting that we've had a lot of experts on our podcast talk about is the shift from cloud to edge computing.
Yes.
We still see value in both, and sometimes there's a hybrid or cross cloud, kind of infrastructure model that's built, but the shift to more edge computing with AI technologies maturing and machine learning technologies maturing, we think there is a huge value in moving a lot of the pulling the data in, a lot of the interpretation of the data and the analysis of the data, moving that to the edge. We think that is a trend that is just only going to grow over the next number of years. And then one that I think is interesting, and I'm sure people will push back on this one, is I feel like we're going to see a consolidation across the industry. And that's because we have so many companies doing a very similar things. There's only so many potential customers and use cases that I think people will just start to kind of own. And it's hard to find business in IoT. Like, it's hard to find the people who are making the buying decisions who are actually interested in IoT. And, so at the end of the day, only so many companies can exist that do, in a sense, the same thing, So I think we're going to see a consolidation across the industry, whether it's through acquisitions or companies failing, that kind of thing. And I think, so over the next 5 years, I think those are the main things we're going to see. I'm sure there's a whole list somebody else could come up with, but from our standpoint, we think those are some pretty important ones.
All right. So just summarizing, demand will increase while cost will decrease. Connectivity options will grow. That's the second one. Third one, shift from cloud to edge. And fourth one, consolidation. Let me just go into the second one. That's my daily work here. I'm super excited about what's happening in the connectivity space. Yeah. But it is highly complicated. And let me try and pull a little out of that. Do you have any content pieces on your end that you would want to point people towards that can create some clarity between what's hyped and upcoming, 5G, low orbit maybe? What's this like solid things? What to know, what not to know?
Yeah, off the top of my head, it's hard to give exact titles of these pieces, but if you go to iotforall.com, there's a couple places I would recommend checking out. Just going to our search and typing in connectivity, typing in 5G, typing in nb-iot, LP-WAN, different connectivity terms. We have tons of content that span that. Not all written by us either. We have experts that work in this space directly who are the ones involved in these technologies every day. They're the ones actually creating this content that we're helping push out there. So I recommend reading as much as you can on that through there. And then also, I know over the course of, I think we have about 130 or so episodes now on IoT For All's podcast, checking out some of the podcasts. I think they're actually a little earlier in our earlier in our days that we talked a lot about connectivity. So just kind of searching through our database of episodes for those kinds of topics, I think is fantastic, especially the ones where we actually dive into the different technologies and talk about the different connectivity options. So you can kind of understand the full spectrum of them. And we've done a pretty good job of kind of hopefully making it very easy to find. So I'd recommend kind of checking that all out.
Yeah, it is pretty easy to navigate your website. And if I am to just highlight one episode for the people viewing here, that's actually the one that caught our attention towards IoT For All. Yep. That was an October 6th, 2020 episode with Ericsson's Rob Tiffany. What a great guy. And his perspectives on IoT connectivity and his experience, that's like second to none right there.
Yeah, if you want to talk about who is an IoT influencer, what does an IoT influencer look like, or how do they, what do they talk about, is Rob Tiffany. I mean, he's everywhere. He's speaking at events. He's he has his own show on YouTube, and I think it's a podcast also. I know he's also a pretty popular guest on Clubhouse's, the Internet of Things group that they talk on a regular basis. So yeah, he's pretty active, and he was a great guest for us. So yeah, I definitely recommend that episode as well.
All right, great. So let's take we talked about sort of what you see coming in IoT, but what sort of on a more general note, what are some trends you see out there?
Yeah, trends are interesting. We try to ask all of our guests on the podcast for what trends they see. So, I mean,
Oh,
it's full.
what a big catalog you have to choose from here, Ryan.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to pick a couple that I know come up pretty often and are definitely points worth mentioning. So, one I think is a no-brainer for companies is that partnerships are a key to success for IoT. Like not everyone has access to the deals, which is something that a lot of companies will maybe argue with and say that, oh, our sales team can find deals. I'm like, I don't disagree at all. But I will say that companies will realize that how hard it is to find deals directly, and how hard it is to get real inbound leads because people out there searching are only looking for specific things. So the more partnerships that you have that can actually drive business, I think the better you're going to be, not just to bring in deals and be parts of deals, but also provide better solutions to companies. There are companies out there who try to do everything, which is, their approach, but we found that the ecosystem in IoT is very heavily driven by partnerships. And I think that'll be a trend that will only continue even more strongly into the future. This
Fine,
is kind of tied.
If I may, how do you see that one working in relations to the consolidation part you just talked about? Are those linked, or do you see it as consolidation more being M&A kind of territory, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure what will happen, but my guess is that they'll kind of be a mixture of both. The partnerships, the ones who build strong partnerships with companies who complement what they do, who then find good, strong, lasting customers that they can build solutions out and then scale them to bring revenue to all parties involved to sustain their business and grow. Those are the ones that I think have the best chance of surviving. So that's why getting involved in partnerships, finding those companies who do complementary work and not trying to do everything yourself. I mean, it's hard to be an expert in connectivity and also try to do hardware, or be an expert in the software side and then go build hardware. Like they're not always the easiest thing to do well enough to build a business on by doing it yourself and yourself only. So that's why I think even the largest companies out there are partnering with companies who do things or focus on things that maybe they don't focus on. So if let's say they focus on security, they're out there looking for hardware companies to partner with, or connectivity partners or software partners. And, I think bringing that together and not being afraid to have more than one partner in the same space. And then the ones who kind of rise to the top that end up working out, those are the ones that you provide value by bringing business or bringing, an offering they don't have, and vice versa. The ones that work out, build solutions, deploy solutions, get them to scale, and last are the ones that will, I think, continue on and kind of play part in how the consolidation piece of the industry unfolds.
Got it. All right. Clear. And then I broke your flow here. Sorry, but you were saying partnerships, no, sure. And I felt like you had something more coming there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this ties into what we were just talking about, but I'll go a little bit more into detail. So it's around connectivity. And I think one of the trends that we're seeing is the growth of low-cost connectivity and low-cost sensors. So I think, when we talk about it, it's kind of a new term out there, but it's called massive IoT. That really relies on low-cost connectivity, low-cost sensors to allow lots of sensors to be deployed in the field for a single use case and still be affordable to hit the ROI for a potential customer, right? So we're talking about, nb-iot, Cat M1, these kinds of connected devices will grow. The number of these devices deployed will grow. That's not to say that traditional and other types of technologies like cellular and stuff will not, like 5G, 4G, those kinds of technologies will not be important and still grow. I just think the rate, the rate at which these cheaper connectivity options for cheaper sensors like nb-iot, Cat M1, things like that, those, I just think the number of devices that will be deployed will just start to surpass the number of devices deployed for legacy solution or legacy devices with 2G and 3G, or these, cellular and traditional and these other low power kind of options out there. Same with proprietary technologies. So I just think we're going to see these massive IoT devices and connectivity solutions together grow, and it's very important. But it's Absolutely. It's not to say that these other technologies will not be important and play a very, very, very important role in the growth of IoT. It's just at the rate in which we see the growth of the number of devices deployed, I think we're going to see those increase a lot more because it's more affordable and it's easier for people to get started in IoT and then, see that ROI that they're looking for. So that's kind of the second trend I think is important to note. The third one I would say is there are a lot of companies out there, particularly on the software side, that are working to make adoption easier. There's I think you mentioned this in the intro about how many solutions get to pilot and then fail, and it's something that is spread out across the industry. So the easier it is for companies to help other companies adopt IoT, I think those companies are going to be in a very good position to win. So we're talking about and this is related directly to the software side, we're seeing a lot more low code and no code platforms out there in the market. And it's something that we're seeing a lot, especially on IoT For All. We're seeing a lot of people read and digest that content and listen to an episode we had, I think we released it a couple of weeks back, talking about low code and no code platforms and how valuable they can be.
Was that the ThinkLogic's another Rob Rastovich?
Yep. Yeah. So we were talking about just kind of what they are and how much value they can potentially provide. And I think that is something that is relatively new to the market in a way that is more easily understood by the people out there that are comparing different platforms to kind of venture down. But then on the other side of that, there's these low code, no code solutions which allow you to go in, use the platform, build it yourself with some of their assistance, and then deploy these solutions. But then there's the other side of it, which a lot of individuals don't want to go down that path, and they want more handholding, they want more support. And I think that kind of ties into another trend, which is the importance of system integrators, those companies that really understand enough to be dangerous across the entire spectrum of an IoT solution and can help with sustainable and proven partnerships that they already have. Maybe they already have solutions that are ready to go for your specific problem and industry that you're looking to kind of deploy for. And just that expertise, I think, carries a ton of weight still. Even though we are getting more educated on IoT and we understand it more, there's less uncertainty. More people are willing to take that jump into the pilot stage of things. I do think finding system integrators and companies who really understand the entire solution from the hardware all the way through to the software and the user interface side, I think is very important. And those individuals are doing the same kind of mission as the low code, no code platforms, which is to help make adoption easier. And I think those companies that are focused on that will be the ones in a really good position going forward. So that's kind of the third trend that we're seeing. And I don't know how many more you want me to go to. I have at least two more in my head that I can come up with that I think would be worth sharing if we have the time.
So I think let's make this the last sort of question round of this episode. Perfect. So let's by all means take the last two. This is super interesting, Ryan.
Yeah. So the two more things. One I'm going to talk about is, and this is more just high level. It's just the emphasis on the interpretation of the data that's being collected. So we've talked to a lot of guests on our podcast that are working at making the data that's coming in from these devices more easily accessible and presented in a way that is more easy to be engaged with. And I think that's very important. We understand that IoT is very powerful because it can bring in data that we did not have before, but it's also interesting now with how important it is for the end user of these solutions, which oftentimes is not the one making the buying decision, is not the one that's involved in the development of it, but is the one that's actually, let's say, for instance, in a factory, it's a factory line worker, is the one who's interacting with these user interfaces, interacting with the data. And they can't do that unless the data is presented in a very concise and understandable way. And there are companies out there that are focusing on that data interpretation and presentation that I think are doing some great things.
So what level would that be at if we say there's like a basic level that's like the UI, how is it presented visually? Then there's a BI level, start crunching the numbers and understand sort of the business impact. And I guess the top tier is actually seeing what's the actual value creation for the business and the specific business case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things we've talked about before with some of our guests is that if you as an organization are focused on the technology forward, we think that is going to cause you to run into a potential problems down the road. And we feel like one of the better approaches to building a solution for a company is to work from the end user backwards. So the intended end user, who is actually going to be interacting with the data, interacting with that, that user interface that is built. What do they need? How does it need to operate? What kind of data do they want? How does it need to be presented? What should they be able to do from it? What conclusions can they draw from it? And that is how we've kind of seen very good success in IoT, is if you build the solution starting with understanding them, their problem and how they work, and then worrying about, what type of hardware, what kind of connectivity, all the different pieces to actually build the solution and present it. Working basically from the end user backwards, we think is something that we've seen a lot of success in, and is often not an approach companies are taking, but one that we've seen work pretty well. So we see that as a trend.
Doesn't sound like rocket science, but often it's forgotten, right?
Absolutely.
All right. And the last trend?
Yeah. So the last trend I think is worth noting is more about just the industries that IoT is kind of taking off in. And use cases too, I think are worth mentioning here. From a use case standpoint, we've seen asset tracking as probably the largest opportunity or largest growth in the IoT space from a use case standpoint. We see companies.
We can only echo that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, indoor and outdoor. Indoor is becoming really popular now. It's always been very difficult to do indoor well, but it's becoming popular. Tracking individuals and people, not just assets, is something that we're seeing a lot of growth in. So we think asset tracking is a really big trend. And then from an industry perspective, we've seen, manufacturing and industrial, we really think are kind of going to lead the way, with transportation, mobility, those kinds of companies kind of right behind it. Just naturally, they have so many physical things that, if they can understand the data and understand things that are happening with those physical objects and machines, they're going to be more efficient and run a better organization. So manufacturing, industrial, transportation, mobility, we also are seeing growth in the energy and the retail space getting involved in IoT, as well as healthcare. I mean, naturally, from everything that happened with COVID, with being able to track vaccines, track patients, track equipment within hospitals, all those kinds of things, we're seeing very large growth in from an adoption standpoint with IoT. So those are kind of the main trends we're seeing. I'm sure there's plenty more we could talk about, but those are some of the key ones that we've kind of bubbled up to the top as of recently.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Well appreciated. And for those paying attention, they can see what the show name is again, IoT For All. It's on your t-shirt right there. I can only recommend to close down this window now, get into the search bar, type in IoT For All, start listening, start reading, feel enlightened, get smarter, be happy. And how to follow you or hit you up, Ryan, for those people that are extra curious?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to check out the website, like you were saying, iotforall.com, iotforall.com. Our podcast is in all of the normal podcast directories on social. It's IoT For All on Twitter, LinkedIn, that kind of good stuff. For me personally, I think my Twitter is just at Ryan Chacon, RyanChacon. You can email me, ryan@iotforall.com as well. If you have questions, want to learn about kind of getting your company's content and, kind of growing your thought leadership with our publication and getting in touch with our audience. Always open to chat. And yeah.
That's great. And all the info provided, of course, we'll put in the show notes as well to make it easy accessible.
Fantastic.
Ryan, one thing left to do here. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it,
This has been great. I really enjoy being on the show, and look forward to seeing this get out to your audience. Is there anything else we can do? Let us know.
Great. Thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too.